What do we want to see from the Minnesota Wild tonight against the Calgary Flames? Plus, an injury update on Matt Zuccarello, Matt Dumba, and Jared Spurgeon, and who will consist of the Black Aces that the Minnesota Wild have on hand for the postseason. We take a look at all that and more today on Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. And just as a reminder, Locked On Wild is free and available wherever you listen to podcasts. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we look at some key components that it would be nice to see against the Calgary Flames tonight in one of the final regular season games of the year. We'll also look at some of the names that could make up the Wild's Black Aces for the postseason, and an update on a couple of key components for the Wilds that have been missing games due to injury. My name is Seth Topol, host of Locked On Wild, veteran Minnesota sports content producer with well over a decade's worth of experience covering your favorite Minnesota sports teams and now hosting Locked On Wild. Happy to have you along for a Thursday episode of the show. And tonight, the Minnesota Wild host the Calgary Flames, one of the top teams in the Western Conference, in the second to last game of the season for the Wilds before the postseason starts up against St. Louis next week. And coming off of a game like we saw against the Arizona Coyotes, it's obvious that we'd like to see the Wilds have a better effort first and foremost. I think that one pretty much speaks for itself. But there are a few other things that would be nice to just see happen in this game tonight. And so we'll start with, of course, the man between the pipes, Cam Talbot, who is going to be making his first start in the last 3 games after Marc-Andre Fleury got 3 starts in a row. Now, that was interesting. It was an interesting move by the Wild. But if you look at it, it kind of lines up with what we have been discussing over the last couple of days, over the last couple of weeks, in that it was a little bit of a built-in kind of a rest, a breather for Talbot before the playoffs start, likely meaning that this will be his final tune-up before a probable Game 1 start against the St. Louis Blues next week. And so for Talbot, really hoping to see him have a strong performance here tonight to continue what has been a great run for him over his last, I believe it's 15 starts. Talbot is 12-0-3 with no regulation losses since March 1st. So continues to play sensational hockey, but you look at some of the poor performances over that stretch. 2 of them include the St. Louis Blues. And so this will be a very tough test for the Wilds tonight against the Flames. And so this is a perfect opportunity for Talbot to get that final tune-up before the postseason begins. So would like to see him continue to show strong form and not leave any hesitation or doubt as to how things are going to shake out with the playoffs next week. So first and foremost, would love to see a strong start for Cam Talbot in the net tonight. Also, on the special teams front, I really don't care who ends up making up the power play and penalty kill units for the Wild tonight, because as we'll talk about here in just a bit, Wild have 3 key components that are on the brink of returning, and it sounds like should be ready to roll come next week. So they will take their normal spots on those units. But I think just mentality-wise tonight, especially on the power play, I would like to see the lever turned, the dial turned from pass first to shoot first. It doesn't matter, it doesn't matter who's facilitating or anything like that. Just want to see the team be aggressive on special teams, so that we avoid having a similar performance as we did against the Coyotes on the power play, going 0 for 6 and barely getting one shot per power play. That can't happen. So let's see some volume shooting on the power play tonight. Would imagine there will be some opportunities going up against a physical Flames team. So would like to see that, and penalty kill, just want to see that aggression as well continue. That's been, I think, the strong point for this penalty kill when it's working, is that the Wild are playing aggressively and not allowing the opposition to dictate what they want to do when they're on the power play. So let's just see some intent and some purpose on special teams in this game here tonight. And then you look at the names for this Flames team. You've obviously got Johnny Gaudreau, Matthew Tkachuk, Elias Lindholm, amongst others, as your go-to top scorers. Would like to see the grief line, now that they've been reunited, give that top Flames line, which has just been so dangerous pretty much all season, give those guys some fits in this one tonight. Really battle them and make life difficult for them. It's probable that that they're going to end up still recording some points. I mean, it's hard to keep top lines quiet these days. So just would like to see them have to earn it, have to battle for their opportunities, and see that grief line really help kind of restore order for this team. As far as the rest of the lines go, obviously with Kirill Kaprizov out, or not out, with Matt Zuccarello out, want to see the Kevin Fiala line kind of take the lead and help the team out with this one. Now, as far as goalies for the Flames go, I would imagine it will be Markstrom, but I suppose they could go really any direction, because pretty much everything has been locked in for the Flames. So they could end up going Markstrom, and it looks like it's likely that they will. But regardless of who's in net for the Flames, would like to just see the Wild, offensively be aggressive and really just overall just bounce back from that ugly performance against the Arizona Coyotes, because as the situation lends itself for playoff seeding, the Wild with tonight and tomorrow night left. St. Louis plays tomorrow night. That's it. So if the Wild get 3 points in the final 2 games, they get the 2 seed. So had initially tweeted out that if the Blues would have won on Tuesday night, that you got to just kind of turn the switch off, because it's likely then that the Blues would be the team that got the 2 seed. But now that these teams are still neck and neck, I would like to see this team still kind of go full bore into the playoffs, so that they're not dealing with that rest versus rust debate that so often happens at this point in the season. So just want to see a bounce back here tonight against the Flames, and would like to see a Wild team that kind of still treats it like a game that has some major meaning. And I think we will. I think Dean Evison has done a good enough job with this team, getting them to bounce back after lackluster performances. So I don't think that will be an issue in this one tonight. Now, as we alluded to, there are a couple of players who are getting very close to a return. And so we'll look at the injury impact for Jared Spurgeon, Matt Zuccarello, and Matt Dumba, and what we can expect once they return to the lineup. That is next here on Locked On Wild. Shady Rays is an independent sunglasses company that gives you the features of $200 sunglasses for a fraction of the price. That means polarized lenses, well-constructed durable frames, and premium high-end finishes. Also, something you won't find anywhere else is Shady Rays' insane protection program. Shady Rays includes lost and broken protection on every single pair. They will send you a brand new pair if you lose them, no matter what happens. Give them a try, and if you don't love them, you will not pay a cent. It's as simple as that. Plus, 10 meals are donated to fight hunger in America when you shop with Shady Rays. Exclusively for our listeners, head to shadyrays.com and use the code LOCKEDON to get 50% off 2 or more pairs of polarized sunglasses. That's code LOCKEDON for their best deal of the season. 50% off 2 or more pairs of Shady Rays sunglasses, backed by over 150,000 verified 5-star reviews. The Locked On Wild podcast is sponsored in part by Jake Danielson with First Class Mortgage. First Class Mortgage is your friendly local mortgage company in Maple Grove, Minnesota. If you're looking to purchase a new home, cabin, or investment property in Minnesota, Wisconsin, South Dakota, or Florida, give Jake a call today. Plus, if you're a homeowner, now is still a great time for a quick refinance review to see what options are available to help tap into your equity and fund those home improvement projects, consolidate debts, or put cash in your hands. First Class Mortgage is a local family-owned lender, and the best part about it is that Jake does the shopping for you to find competitive rates and programs for all of your home financing needs. With over 700 5-star reviews, Jake at First Class Mortgage will be sure to deliver first-class experience and service for any of your home purchase or refinance needs. Best part about it is Jake is a born and raised Minnesotan and sports fan who would be honored to be your mortgage guy too. Contact Jake for a no-cost, no-obligation mortgage review at 763-416-6789 or shoot him an email at jake@firstclasscorp.com. Again, 763-416-6789. Make sure to mention the Locked On Wild podcast to receive a credit towards a free appraisal. Give him a call at 763-416-6789 and go wild today. Some restrictions do apply. First Class Mortgage's NMLS number is 322842, and Jake's NMLS is 2025218. This is not an agreement to lock into an interest rate under Minnesota law. First Class Mortgage is an equal housing lender. Continuing today's episode of Locked On Wild, once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. And once again, make sure that your second listen of the Days of the Locked On NHL podcast to give you a full recap of everything going on throughout the NHL as we gear up for the postseason starting next week. With the news today, Michael Russo tweeting out that Matt Zuccarello, Jared Spurgeon, and Matt Dumba are all skating at the moment. Not going to play tonight, but there's a chance that all or some of them could play tomorrow night against the Avalanche. Leads you to believe that they'll be ready to return once the playoffs start against St. Louis next week, which would be a huge boost for this Wild team. You look at what each bring to the table. I mean, Zuccarello, restore that order on the top line, which is going to be huge. Having the two scoring lines to combat what St. Louis is going to try to do offensively, and having the guy that I think is the missing link to this Wild power play. And it's a small sample size, but seeing Zuccarello and Kaprizov united with Kevin Fiala and Joel Eriksson Ek and Jared Spurgeon on that top power play line, it just was the thing that clicked, I think, the easiest and just looked the most functional from a power play perspective. And so putting Zuccarello back in that mix gives you hope that this power play will be able to capitalize on opportunities when they present themselves. You're upgrading on the defenseman on that power play by going from Alex Goligoski to Jared Spurgeon, and you're also upgrading Matt Zuccarello at that spot too. So they not only help on the power play, but they help in the lineup as well. Credit to Nick Bjugstad for stepping in to fill the spot of Zuccarello on that top line, but there's a substantial difference from Bjugstad to Zuccarello on that top line. There's nobody that has the chemistry with Kirill Kaprizov like the Lizard King does. So getting him back in the lineup is going to help both the offense and the special teams as well. And with the number of players that St. Louis has that are capable of becoming game breakers, you're going to need to have a couple of defensemen that can just flat out shut them down. And Jonas Brodin does that. He has done that pretty much throughout his career as being an unsung guy who can shut down an elite opponent. Has done that to Connor McDavid pretty much every time the Wild and the Oilers have locked horns over the last couple of regular seasons. So, in order to combat the likes of Vladimir Tarasenko and Pavel Buchnevich, Jordan Kyrou, Barbashev, any of those guys, and there's a lengthy list of good scoring options for the Blues, you're going to need to have both Brodin and Spurgeon available to help put the clamps on those guys. There's nobody better at shutting down odd man rushes, at just preventing opportunities from opponents in terms of shots or scoring chances. Nobody better than Brodin and also Jared Spurgeon. So getting Spurgeon back is going to give this defense the depth that that makes it so good. You get Spurgeon and Middleton back together, then you slot everybody back down into their normal spot in the lineup. And piggybacking off of that, having Matt Dumba be the complement to Jonas Brodin allows that pairing to kind of function in the same way that Jacob Middleton and Jared Spurgeon do, in that Dumba can be the guy that kind of jumps up onto the offense while Brodin keeps order on defense, and Brodin then isn't having to cheat as much to try to help out with his line mate. So getting all these guys back just is going to help put everybody in their natural spots and eliminate people trying to do too much, in particular Alex Goligoski, Jordy Ben, guys like that. Putting those guys back down to the bottom of the lineup where they are better suited it's going to be a huge lift for this team come the start of the playoffs. So it would be nice to see those guys get at least a little bit of action in tomorrow's game before the playoffs get rolling. But ultimately, the bigger thing is just getting them back and getting them into the lineup come game one of the opening round series against the Blues. That's the bigger goal. That's the bigger thing, regardless of if they play either tomorrow night or next week. Just getting them back into the lineup is the biggest factor for this Wild team. We are, of course, going to have a ton of playoff coverage coming up for you starting next week. We'll have a preview with some intel on the St. Louis Blues with Josh Hyman of Locked On Blues. So look for that. We also have a huge playoff roundtable coming up where we dive into some of the big keys for the Minnesota Wild. So we've got you covered fully for the postseason here on Locked On Wild. So make sure to tune in with us every step of the way in what will hopefully be a lengthy playoff run for this team. We'll finish today's episode. Little news as to some potential black aces for the Wild once the playoffs start. So we'll look at those two names and who else could be joining them as part of the Black Aces to finish off today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your betting stats and sports info. You can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NBA playoffs, Major League Baseball, and the final push before the Stanley Cup playoffs start next week. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. So you can head to their website or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. Start studying up. Kentucky Derby is coming up in a couple of weeks, and you will want to make sure that you are ready to throw down on the favorites, whichever horse you think will win it. It's always a better bet to go with betonline.net. So make sure to check everything out that they have to offer at BetOnline, where the game starts. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Michael Russo mentioning in the Marco Rossi front that Rossi is headed to Minnesota as of today for an injury to be evaluated. There will be other Black Aces coming up. The Wild's initial plan is to travel third goalie Zane McIntyre during the playoffs. The rest of the Black Aces, which will include Rossi and Kalen Addison, will stay behind to practice, and if needed, it's a short flight for them to make their way to the arena. So that tips the hand as to three of the members of the Black Aces, Rossi, Addison, and McIntyre. And it does also kind of answer the question as to, once the Wild had clinched a playoff spot, how come we didn't see Marco Rossi up to get a little more seasoning to potentially step in and help this team out if they suffer an injury during the postseason? Well, as Russo answered it, because he's injured himself. So it's unfortunate, because it would have been really nice, especially with all the strides that Rossi has taken this season. Had just a sensational season down in Iowa. It would have been nice to see him rewarded for that by getting a chance to maybe get into a game or two. Ultimately, he will get the same sort of experience that Matt Boldy did with this team last year, in just getting to practice with the team during the postseason and getting a chance to kind of get his feet wet that way. So it will work out for Rossi. But, like I said, it would have been nice to see him at some point here at the end of the season. As for Kalen Addison, I know a lot of people have clamored for him to get time as well, and I'm right there with you, considering what we've seen at points from Jordy Ben this season. But ultimately, it looks as though his window is next year at the earliest. But again, he'll get the opportunity to practice and to just kind of be part of the festivities here during the postseason. As far as other players that will make the Black Aces, I would imagine we will see the likes of, say, Adam Beckman. You could look at any of the other guys who have already been with the team this year. Mitchell Chafee probably will be part of that Black Aces group as well. I'd imagine Kyle Rao will also be. Kalen Addison on defense. Dakota Murmas will probably be part of that group as well. And then Zane McIntyre as the third goalie. Some of the guys that will probably be part of that grouping. And if you, like me, were kind of curious as to just how that thing works, obviously in the postseason, the salary cap not a factor, and the 23-man roster is no longer a thing. So the Wild can have as many players as they want as part of the Black Aces designation. So there will be a set amount that they bring up to be on hand in the event that there is any sort of injury or situation that requires them to get into the lineup. So unfortunate end to the season for the Iowa Wild, too. They were battling for a playoff spot all the way up until the end of the season and just ended up being one of those odd teams out. And so as you've heard with Spoke Z, anytime he has hopped on the show, a kind of a weird season for the Iowa Wild with all of the penalties that they took throughout the year, but unfortunately does not lead to a playoff spot despite the furious rally that they had at the end of the season to try to get back into the playoff picture. Just couldn't quite seal the deal and make the postseason here this year. So they'll have to try to do that again next year, but we'll see plenty of those Iowa faces here over the next as long as the postseason goes for the Wild. Those guys will get a chance to practice and just be on the ready if they are needed by the big club. And so it'll be interesting to see what the list actually looks like. But my guess is that a lot of those guys that we discussed will be part of it once it is put together. And I think that's going to wrap it up for today's episode of Locked On Wild. One other note to pass along is that the Wild did sign Simon Johansson to an entry-level contract for the 2022-2023 season. And so it will be interesting to see what his projection is. My guess is he ends up being an Iowa Wild guy, but 2-year entry-level contract to begin with the 2022-2023 season. Had a tremendous year this year and added some offense to his arsenal. So congratulations to Simon Johansson for that ELC as just another depth piece that the Wild can have at their disposal in the minor leagues. That will wrap up today's episode of Locked On Wild. Now that your first listen of the day is done, make sure you head over to Locked On Sports Minnesota to check out the Ron Johnson Show. The former Gopher and NFL wide receiver is the voice of Minnesota sports with some big opinions and elite level guests. Make sure to check out the Ron Johnson Show wherever you listen to podcasts and on YouTube as part of Locked On Sports Minnesota. Locked On Wild, also free and available anywhere you listen to your podcast. So make sure to check us out and gear up for the postseason, which already starts next week. Just search Locked On Wild to find us on social media as well. We'll keep you as up to date as possible on all things Minnesota Wilds as we gear up for a long push for the Wild in the playoffs. We are keeping you up to date as much as we can with new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.